surface, a film about loneliness doesn't seem as though it would be all that scary. It's a subject that overall seems like it would just be depressing, perhaps even boring. But in The Blackcoat's Daughter, Oz Perkins managed to figure out a way to package this subject matter in such a way as to not only make it compelling, but downright horrifying.
There's an element to the horror genre that's both glamorous, strangely glamorous. Movies like Rosemary's Baby, it's a very glamorous movie, where a lot of attention is paid to silence and color and texture and glamour, look, beauty, frailty. And so, keeping with those sort of concepts and those feelings, those vibes, I set out to just sort of to make something like that was going to be sort of a sad movie disguised as a horror movie.
So well disguised, in fact, that you really don't have a firm grasp of what the underlying theme of the film is until the very last shot. The way information is presented in this film is very controlled. The story is non-linear and separated into chapters, named for each of the three main characters. We actually aren't even aware that the story takes place in two separate timelines until about 44 minutes in. So up until this point, a majority of the information we are given is entirely out of context, which leads us to make a lot of assumptions. There's really only a couple of things that we know for sure. We know that Rose has intentionally told her parents the wrong date in which students are to be picked up so that she'll have some extra time to see her boyfriend and tell him about her possible pregnancy. We know that Kat's parents have failed to show up as well, and no one has been able to get a hold of them. The film begins with Kat having a nightmare about her parents getting into a car crash, but this hardly explains her odd behavior in Father Brian's office or this shit. There's a scene between the two girls before Rose leaves for the night where Rose tries to convince Kat that the two women who work at the school are Satan worshippers.
You do know about the sisters, don't you?
Know what?
You know they're wigs, right? You know that they have no hair on their bodies.
That's not true.
You didn't hear about Jen Darling's sister? Graduated 3 years ago. She walked in on them one night, worshipping the devil.
We don't really know whether this story is true or if Rose is just being a bitch, or both, but we're aware that this is a horror movie, so we can't help but consider the possibility that what she's saying may have some truth to it. After this, we're introduced to a new character, Joan, who we can see by her armband and fragmented memories that she has escaped from a mental institution. As she's sitting at a bus station, she's approached by an older man named Bill, who, concerned about her well-being, offers her a ride. Bill's wife seems very annoyed by this and says that they will only take her as far as the next gas station. Joan glances over and sees a bouquet of flowers in the seat beside her, and as the car is pulling away, we get a shot of a bumper sticker with the name of the boarding school that Rose and Kat attend on it. There are several things working together here to cleverly misdirect the audience. First of all, we have Rose's story of this girl who supposedly walked in on some staff members worshipping the devil. The girl is described as having graduated a few years ago and is unnamed. When the story switches over to Joan, this information is still fresh in our minds. Joan appears to be slightly older than the other two girls in the story and has flashbacks of having been in a mental institution, so we wonder if perhaps she's the girl from Rose's story and what she's seen has scarred her to the point of having a serious mental breakdown. After we're shown the bumper sticker, we're inclined to think that these might be Kat's parents, and the wife's annoyance at Joan tagging along has to do with them being behind schedule, and the flowers are meant to be a way of apologizing to their daughter for being late. We may even venture to guess that Bill's reasons for helping Joan partially have to do with her resemblance to Kat. All of these moments, combined with Joan's continued flashbacks and the visuals that strongly suggest Kat might be suffering from some type of demonic possession, make this moment all the more impactful.
Unlike other genres, horror movies really force presence. They really force the audience to be present with what's going to, not in the same way that you are with a period drama or a Pixar movie, both of which are fantastic. But in a Pixar movie, you're not but in a horror movie, it really, your attention is fixed and your presence is really fixed. So you can do a lot, and use silence also. Don't forget silence.
The film uses this hyper-focusing of the audience to its advantage and is able to get a lot of information across without very much exposition at all. We know that Rose thinks that she's pregnant even though it's never explicitly stated. We never actually hear the word pregnant. We're only given fragments of conversations, one in which her friend refers to Rose's problem as half his, and another in which Rose's boyfriend says, "At least let me drive you," likely referring to an abortion. We know that she isn't pregnant when we see her in the bathroom stall later on in the film looking happy and relieved after looking down at her toilet paper. We never actually hear her say, "I think I'm pregnant," or "Oh yay, I'm on my period," because it isn't necessary. As an audience, we're perfectly capable of picking up on these things without having it spelled out for us. The same goes for the situation with Kat's parents. It's never explicitly stated that they've actually died in a car accident like in her nightmare, but we gather from the phone call to the school and the headmaster showing up with a police officer that this is actually the case. Even as we get towards the end of the film, we understand that Kat and Joan are actually the same person because we're able to put all of the visual clues together ourselves. Considering horror films are a bit notorious for being quite heavy-handed when it comes to exposition, subtly putting forth information in this way provides a refreshing take on the genre.
Always peel back what you're doing. Always hold back what you're doing. Restraint in a horror picture is really kind of where it's at, because that's what we're talking about in any horror movie. We're talking about, I don't know what's going to happen to me in my life. Like, I don't know how my life ends. And so that whole kind of hidden quality is like pretty deep.
Oz Perkins is a fan of classic horror films, which isn't entirely surprising considering his father starred in one of the most well-known horror films of all time. There's a fun fact you can drop at a party, like, "Hey, did you know Anthony Perkins' son is actually a very talented director?" And they'll be like, "You weren't invited here, I'm calling the police." Anyway, as a fan of horror, Oz Perkins is able to skillfully use our existing knowledge of horror against us. When we meet Kat in the beginning of the film, her behavior suggests that she's been abused in some way. Her attachment to her parents, lack of friends, and lack of boundaries when speaking to Father Brian all appear to be evidence of a very damaged child. When you add Rose's devil worship story and Joan's memory of Father Brian menacingly standing over her, we're almost certain that the staff has been abusing some of its students. I mean, it's always the staff, right? We think of films like Suspiria, where the women that run the ballet school turn out to be a coven of witches, or Rosemary's Baby, where the residents of the apartment building use the main character as a vessel for the Antichrist. The victim of possession is usually just that, a victim. In The Exorcist, Reagan didn't exactly want to be possessed, she just thought she was talking to Captain Howdy, which is an excellent name for a demon, by the way.
Captain Howdy, yeah, I see.
Nice.
Oh, I bet he is.
Or in the Amityville Horror, they just thought they were getting a good deal on a house, they didn't think they were getting a haunted dad. That shit tends to happen by accident. But as we find out, the Blackcoat's daughter goes in a much different direction. As it turns out, Rose's story is just some rumor she enjoys repeating, and the staff has nothing to do with any of the shenanigans that go on. I mean, aside from becoming human sacrifices, that is. And rather than being a victim of possession, Kat is much closer to what one would call a very willing participant. I feel like aside from being a sad film disguised as a horror film, it's also a very simple film disguised as a complicated one. When we get to the film's final chapter, we're finally shown what's been going on with Kat, and all of the expectations we've built up are swept away. Everything that has been going on has been between Kat and this demonic entity that's been communicating with her. The film presents us with all of these directions it could have taken, roads that other horror films have gone down before, and then peels them away, revealing this hidden story of a lonely girl whose only friend is a demon. The school isn't some cover-up for a satanic cult. Kat isn't bullied in school to the point of turning evil. In fact, aside from Rose being rude to her that one time, she really isn't bullied at all. Considering the loving way she's marked her calendar, it seems as though her home life was relatively normal as well. She's just profoundly lonely, and when this demon shows her a dream that her parents have died in a car accident, she's so desperate not to be alone that she very willingly gives herself over to it. The way the film presents this relationship between Kat and this evil spirit is like a love story. I mean, typically in a possession film, you certainly don't expect the big climactic exorcism scene to make you sad. Despite all of the horrific things Kat has done up to this point, you can't help but feel a little heartbroken when you hear this line.
Don't go.
Upon watching this film a second time, you're able to pick up on little details in the way that Joan, who we now know to be Kat, behaves. The way she clenches her jaw when Bill mentions God, how she uses the payphone with the hope that her friend will answer, and my personal favorite, the way she takes a moment to put on a little blush after murdering Rose's parents to make sure she looks cute for the moment she's reunited with her only friend. As far as the overarching question of whether this film is meant to be taken literally, as in the demon actually existing, or if it's just a manifestation of this young girl's mental illness, is really up to you. I personally prefer the idea of the demon being a real thing because I feel like that best explains how Kat would be capable of knowing her parents are dead through a dream and her ability to float up into the air during the exorcism scene. However, I think it could just as easily be looked at as maybe Kat has this fear that her parents won't show up, causing her to have a dream about them getting into a car accident, and the fact that that really happened is purely coincidental. And as far as the exorcism scene goes, the only two people in the room are two people with very strong beliefs, so the floating up into the air stuff might be looked at as the priest seeing what he wants to see, or as another manifestation of Kat's mental illness. The final chapter is Kat's chapter, so we are seeing things through her point of view. So if she believes she's floating up into the air, then that's what will be shown. The great thing about this film is that we really have the option to experience it either way without affecting its overarching theme of profound loneliness. This film's peeling back of tropes, excellent musical score by Elvis Perkins, solid acting, along with the perfect amount of restraint displayed in Oz Perkins' writing and directing, stands as an example of how to do a horror story properly. And don't get me wrong, I love my all-out gore and fright fest as well, but I also really love when a film takes its time, putting more weight onto a select few scary and disturbing moments rather than blowing its spooky load every 5 minutes. So anyways, I hope this video helped you have a little bit better grasp on the Blackcoat's daughter if you didn't already, and thank you for watching, pal. Love you. Goodbye.